The issue about the grooming gangs inquiry is very straightforward. The government clearly never wanted these two things to be put together. And I suspect that their big reason for not wanting those two things to be put together is that much of this took place in areas which are run by local Labour councils.
Let's be clear from the start. This wasn't just another awkward TV moment. This was a rupture, a point where polite conversation collapsed and something darker, something raw, broke through the screen. On Sky News, Trevor Phillips, the same Trevor Phillips who once chaired the Equality and Human Rights Commission, sat upright, looked straight into the camera and detonated a truth bomb no one in Westminster wanted aired. He accused Keir Starmer's Labour government, yes, that Labour government, of protecting child grooming gangs. Protecting them, not failing them. Protecting them. You could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. The newsroom froze. The host shifted in his chair. And for a few excruciating seconds, British television became a mirror for everything this country has refused to face. What followed wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. Quick favour before we dive into the footage. If you enjoy this kind of content, please smash that like button and hit subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. It's totally free for you, but it means the world to us and helps the channel grow. Already subscribed? You're awesome. Thank you. All right, let's get into the video.
The intersection of race and sexual predation. And, let's be honest that actually a lot of this is bringing those two things together in an unpleasant way. The issue about the grooming gangs inquiry is very straightforward. The government clearly never wanted these two things to be put together. And I suspect that their big reason for not wanting those two things to be put together is that much of this took place in areas which are run by local Labour council. The difference with this grooming gangs thing is that everybody knows. It happens in public. The girls are but first attracted usually by young men from within those communities, flash cars, cigarettes, they give them drugs, all the rest of it. And the girls, and I did, as you said, this film 10 years ago, and what the girls tell you is, this is my boyfriend, because they think that's what's happening. Only later do they discover they're hooked on drugs, they need the alcohol and all of that, and then they're passed around amongst older men. Is that these people know that they are protected. They're protected politically. They're protected by social workers. They're protected by local police because everybody says we don't want to ramp up tensions in the community.
Phillips didn't hedge. He didn't soften his words with careful phrasing or bureaucratic nuance. These people, he said, know that they are protected politically. And that line, it hit like a verdict. Because in one sentence, he exposed something that politicians, journalists and activists have been tiptoeing around for years. A fear of acknowledging the link between race, politics and institutional cowardice. It's the scandal Labour hoped you'd ignore, but today we're going to dig into it. Every shocking detail, every hidden report, every unanswered question that the establishment wants buried. Because if this story dies quietly, the silence will say more than any investigation ever could. The first crack appeared not in Parliament, but in Rotherham, over a decade ago. A town once known for its steel mills and proud working-class roots became the epicentre of one of the darkest child abuse scandals in British history. Thousands of young girls, mostly white, mostly poor, were systematically groomed, raped, trafficked and silenced. Local authorities knew. The police knew. Social workers wrote reports so damning they had to be buried under community cohesion policies. And who was running those local councils? Labour. Year after year, the same political machine that promised to fight inequality to protect the vulnerable turned away. Not out of ignorance, but out of fear. Fear of being called racist, fear of losing votes, fear of conflict. Phillips, who spent decades studying the country's cultural fractures, broke the code of silence. He said aloud what many whisper behind closed doors, that this was not random, not isolated, and not merely a failure of individuals. This was systemic. And the word systemic cuts deep because it means it wasn't just a few bad apples, it was the orchard. When Sky News gave him that platform, they expected commentary, they got confession. For years, the grooming gang issue has been framed as a historical failure, something from the past. Yet the survivors tell a different story. Many say the networks are still active, still operating, and still emboldened. They know nothing will happen. One survivor said in an ITV interview last year, they know the police are scared of touching them. Another revealed that officers once told her, we can't risk inflaming racial tensions. Imagine that. The job of protecting children sidelined to protect reputations. And yet when Phillips drew that line directly to Labour, the reaction from Westminster was immediate and defensive. Labour MPs rushed to social media to condemn his divisive language. Party spokespeople issued careful statements about not conflating ethnicity with criminality. But none of them addressed the actual accusation. That the institutions run by their councils, their social workers, their police oversight boards failed to act out of political fear. The silence said everything. What makes this moment so explosive isn't just the subject matter, it's who said it. Trevor Phillips isn't a right-wing agitator. He's not Nigel Farage. He's not a Reform Party firebrand. He's a man who chaired Britain's equality watchdog, who spent his life fighting for diversity, tolerance and fairness. For him to turn and say the system is protecting predators means something has broken beyond repair. The left can't dismiss him as a bigot. The right can't claim him as their own. He's standing in the middle of the wreckage saying this is what political cowardice looks like. As the clip spread across social media, the backlash grew. Hashtags like hashtag Labour cover up and hashtag Trevor Phillips. Truth began trending on X within hours. The BBC remained silent for most of the day, eventually releasing a short article that quoted Phillips selectively, cutting the most damning lines about Labour councils. The Guardian called his comments controversial. The Times called them provocative. But ordinary viewers called them, finally, the truth. And yet beneath the outrage lies a deeper question. How did we get here? How did one of the most progressive parties in Europe become accused of turning a blind eye to the most vulnerable in society? The answer is uncomfortable. It began with the fusion of two sacred cows of modern politics, multiculturalism and moral relativism. The idea that all communities are equal and all cultures must be protected, even when protecting them means silencing victims. In cities like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford and Oldham, local officials were warned repeatedly about patterns of abuse. The reports mentioned Asian male perpetrators and white female victims, but the words Asian and male were quietly deleted in later drafts. Senior Labour councillors worried it would hand ammunition to the far right, so they rewrote the truth, and children paid the price. Phillips, in that moment on live TV, forced Britain to look again. The difference, he said, is that these grooming gangs don't operate in secrecy. Everyone knows it happens in public. They're protected. That's the line that changes everything, because it's not about what's hidden. It's about what's tolerated. These weren't monsters in shadows. They were men in cars outside schools, men loitering in kebab shops, men showing up in court with smirks because they knew the authorities feared them more than they feared justice. And what of Keir Starmer, the man now leading Labour into government after 14 years in opposition? His record, too, is under scrutiny. As Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 to 2013, Starmer oversaw major decisions on child exploitation cases. His critics say he was cautious to the point of paralysis. Under his tenure, the Crown Prosecution Service dropped dozens of grooming-related investigations for insufficient evidence. Internal memos later revealed that many of these cases were deemed too sensitive. Sensitive to whom? That's the question. Phillips's comments reopened like a wound. Within hours, Conservative MPs pounced. Trevor Phillips has said what many of us have known for years, one backbencher told GB News. Labour councils covered up industrial-scale abuse to avoid offending minorities. Reform UK released a statement calling for a public inquiry into Labour's cultural cover-up. Nigel Farage, never one to miss a headline, called it the most important truth bomb dropped on live TV in years. But the most telling reaction came from within Labour itself. According to leaks from the party's internal communications, senior aides warned MPs not to engage with the narrative. One advisor reportedly wrote, "Do not amplify Phillips. We cannot win on this ground." And that's the story, isn't it? When faced with moral outrage, the reflex is always to manage the optics, not the truth, to silence, not to solve. But the public mood is shifting. A new poll from YouGov taken the day after the interview found that 61% of Britons believe political correctness has gone too far in policing truth. More than half agreed that fear of racism accusations prevents authorities from tackling certain crimes. That's not fringe sentiment, that's mainstream Britain, and it terrifies the establishment. Because if the public stops trusting institutions to tell the truth, the entire framework of managed consensus collapses. As the pressure built, the Home Office scrambled to respond. A spokesperson promised a new phase of the grooming gang inquiry, but critics were quick to note the same bureaucratic vagueness that stalled change for years. Meanwhile, survivors watched the headlines roll in with a grim sense of déjà vu. They'll talk about it for a week, one said. Then they'll move on. They always move on. Trevor Phillips's words, though, refused to fade, because they weren't just about grooming gangs. They were about a moral disease, an infection of cowardice that runs through Britain's public life. It's the same sickness that silences whistleblowers, that shames journalists into self-censorship, that convinces leaders to choose comfort over confrontation. It's why reports vanish, why officials resign quietly, and why the truth comes out only when someone has nothing left to lose. And let's not pretend this is confined to Labour. The Conservatives, too, have played their part in the Great British Silence. Years of austerity gutted social services. Police forces lost thousands of officers. Survivors were left waiting years for counselling. The rot runs across party lines. But this moment, this confrontation between Phillips and Starmer's Labour, feels different, because it shatters the illusion that moral virtue belongs to any one side. When Sky News replayed the clip later that evening, analysts tried to soften it. They said Phillips was raising a debate. They said his words were provocative but important. Number. What he did was indict a generation of leadership. He said out loud what every briefing paper buried, that Britain's institutions chose politics over protection, the policy exchange called for a review into ideological capture within local authorities. The Institute of Race Relations accused Phillips of weaponising tragedy. Oxford professor Louise Richardson told the BBC, "When moral fear replaces moral courage, democracies rot from within." Even the Archbishop of Canterbury issued a cautious statement about the need to face uncomfortable truths. It's rare for academia, politics and religion to collide on a single scandal. That's how seismic this moment has become. Internationally, the story travelled fast. The New York Times described Britain's reckoning with taboo truths. Francis Le Monde called it une crise morale nationale. And in Australia, Sky News commentators openly praised Phillips's courage, saying Britain needs more truth-tellers and fewer spin doctors. The embarrassment for Labour was global. Inside Downing Street, sources leaked that the Prime Minister's office was monitoring public reaction. The calculation is obvious. If Starmer can't contain this, it could define his government's credibility on justice and equality. Opposition leaders are already framing it as Labour's Jimmy Savile moment, a scandal that could corrode public trust for a generation. And then came the second shockwave. 2 days after the broadcast, an internal memo from the Home Office surfaced, dated 2019. It warned that political sensitivities had delayed the release of a report into grooming networks in the north of England. The author? A senior civil servant who later joined a Labour-run council. The memo included one chilling line. Disclosure at this time could undermine community cohesion. In other words, don't tell the truth. It might offend someone. The story now had documents, receipts, evidence that the silence wasn't accidental. It was engineered. And Phillips, knowingly or not, had ripped the lid off. Public anger began boiling over. Protesters gathered outside local council buildings in Manchester and Sheffield, holding signs that read "No more cover-ups" and "Justice for our daughters." On social media, videos of Starmer's past comments as DPP began resurfacing, where he warned prosecutors to consider community impact before pursuing certain cases. His words, once obscure, now sounded hauntingly similar to the bureaucratic excuses that enabled this scandal. When reporters cornered Starmer outside Number 10, he looked tense. "No one," he said, "no one is above the law, and no one in my government will ever turn a blind eye to abuse." But the damage was already done, because the question wasn't whether Starmer's Labour would act. The question was why it took a television interview for them to even acknowledge the problem, and that's where we are now, a nation forced to confront the cost of silence. Phillips's outburst wasn't just about race or class or politics, it was about the truth. Who gets to tell it, who gets to hide it, and who pays when it's buried? If history has taught us anything, it's that moral scandals don't explode. They erode. Bit by bit, trust collapses. Institutions lose legitimacy. People stop believing what they're told. And when that happens, populists rise. Cynicism spreads and the fabric of democracy itself begins to tear. Britain is standing on that edge now. So what happens next? Does Labour launch a full inquiry, risking its reputation but restoring some integrity? Or does it double down, blame misinformation, and hope the public moves on? Will Keir Starmer face the cameras again and address Phillips's accusations directly? Or will silence become the new form of denial? One thing's certain, this story isn't going away, because it's no longer about Trevor Phillips, it's about us. About whether we demand transparency or settle for managed narratives. About whether truth still matters in a country that claims to value justice. By the end of this video, you've seen what mainstream outlets won't replay, what party spokesmen won't explain, and what too many institutions still refuse to face. There's no script strong enough to rewrite what's already been spoken on live television. The words are out, the mask is off. If you believe the public deserves honesty, if you believe power should never hide behind fear, then share this. Subscribe. Stay alert. Because stories like this don't disappear by accident, they disappear because someone wants them gone. And the next question is the one that should keep every politician awake tonight, if the truth can't be spoken on live TV anymore. Where else will it be told?